of prayer. I'd like to do that every time, as you guys know. Gracious God, we give thanks for every person here. We lift up all the information here. Once again, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my Redeemer. So just a quick, since we're taping here, I just want to make sure everybody knows we're not giving specific medical advice to you. Please check any medications you're on, anything with your medical provider. This is not meant to substitute, it's meant to complement. Certainly if your doctor or your practitioner says, I don't know what he's saying, I don't agree with it, call me. You know where to find me. You got my card. My card has my personal email on it. So if there's any questions, please feel free to contact me. I want to start today with more of a personal note on dementia and cognitive decline, because this disease has really definitely more than any other disease impacted my life and my career way beyond anything else. And so this is personal for me. I welcome everybody in this room. I love to see all the faces, some familiar, some new. And I wanted to just take a minute and let you know that there are two other souls here with us tonight, in my opinion. The first, Ellen Jackson Stanton, was my wife's grandmother, and I didn't really ever get to know her, but she had a huge impact on my wife, being the kind of person that she is. And by the time Rhonda and I got together, she was already in the early stages of dementia and really didn't know who I was. And the next decade was basically the ravages of dementia, and she passed away about 10 years ago. Another soul who's with me her name's Lottie Young Hammond. She was my maternal grandmother. By the time I was 5 years old, all of my grandparents were gone. So I really had no grandparents in my life. My parents were much older when they had me, and their parents were older. I always tease people. I have great-grandfathers who fought in the Civil War. I don't go back I can go way back with just a couple of generations. So I'm kind of a weird duck that way. But Lottie Young Hammond was my paternal grandmother. And she's the one grandparent that I do have an independent memory of. And she lived across the street from us growing up. And Lottie had us over. Each of my older brothers and us, special time, would go over to grandmother's house and spend the night with her. When I was in the first grade, I remember my parents saying, you can't go over to Lottie's anymore. She doesn't know where she is anymore. And I remember thinking, what? It was you think of a foreign concept for a 6-year-old, that somehow someone has lost themselves. And over the next 7-8 years, I watched Lottie deteriorate into a person that required 24-hour care. She had pressure injury. She wasted away very badly, and she died when I was in the 8th grade. And so that's my personal experience as a grandson with dementia. So when I became a doctor and started my practice in 1986, within 2 weeks of me hitting the bricks as this young doctor who's ready to cure every illness there is and just all on fire with medicine I'd learned. And my senior partner said, there's 2 nursing homes with 180 patients in each place, and they need a medical director. Are you interested? And of course, I wasn't going to say no to anything. And so within 10 years, I had more dementia patients than anybody in the Memphis, Shelby County area by far. And most of these cases were advanced dementia. These were folks in nursing homes who needed 24-hour care. And so I rapidly became an expert in dementia. It sort of bloomed into a career. of where dementia was by far the #1 diagnosis I saw, I became an expert. I mean, in fact, I became a medical expert in numerous jurisdictions across the country where I actually was giving expert testimony on the care of patients with dementia, and continue to do so to this day from coast to coast in all kinds of different jurisdictions. And so I became an expert in dementia. And you might be asking, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, I became an expert in pressure sores. I became an expert in fractures. I became an expert in sepsis. I became an expert in all kinds of infectious diseases. And so I knew exactly what was happening to my patients, and I could maybe intervene and fix the things that were wrong with them. But of course, the drug therapies that had come out when I started practice in 1986 started filtering out of the pharmaceutical industry about 1996. So I had about 10 years where I had no drug therapy. And so when Aricept was approved in 1996, I was extremely excited. There's finally a drug for this disease that has been rattling my cage since I was 6 years old. And it was just a major disappointment, to be honest. I mean, if you have a friend or a relative or you're even on it, don't stop it because of what I'm saying. In early dementia, it might kind of slow things down a little bit, but it's been really very disappointing, and all the drugs that have followed that have also been very disappointing. Probably the most important thing I did in my career is I was actually one of the first physicians in the country in 1997 to get a certification in hospice and palliative medicine, and that actually, I think that helped me take care of my end-stage dementia patients better than anything I'd ever learned in med school. So I learned how to take care of symptoms. I learned how to keep people comfortable. I found incredible benefits in music therapy. Believe it or not, is some miraculous stories of reopening consciousness through music therapy. So a whole lot of just awesome things came out of that. But unfortunately, absolutely no drugs that helped the disease itself. And so over the last 10 to 12 years, I've essentially gotten to the point where I've understood that maybe there's more to the story here. And maybe I've been missing something that was right in front of me. You guys ever heard of the story about the truck, the 18-wheeler that gets stuck under the overpass, and all the experts come in and the engineers come in and everybody kind of goes, we got to do this, we got to take this part of the bridge apart, and then a child comes along and says, why don't you flatten the tires? That's kind of the way I feel with lifestyle medicine at this point, is that this is an incredible way to look at this disease from a completely different perspective, and it actually is incredibly effective. There's a book here that we're gonna be giving out at the end of this called The Alzheimer's Solution. It's written by a couple of neurologists in California that I've been reading and studying about for several years, and it's remarkable how potentially treatable this condition is, especially when it's at the mild cognitive impairment stage, and we'll get into that a little bit. So let's go, Caitlin, I'm ready to get going here. So we're going to kind of go through these slides. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on any of these, but I think it's important to understand what we're dealing with is an epidemic. Dementia prevalence, 50 million cases worldwide, 152 million cases by 2050. $1 trillion a year in worldwide costs, and this is grossly underestimated because the amount of free care that is given to dementia patients is completely unaccounted for. And I can tell you these numbers are a small piece of the puzzle. There is, as a medical expert, you review care and see whether or not people got the appropriate care or not. That's one of the hats that I've worn for over 20 years now. One of the things that struck me is I look at death certificates all the time, and I'll see a patient, 85-year-old, dies of cardiopulmonary arrest from pneumonia and urinary tract infection. And there's no mention of dementia on there, even though this person has had advanced dementia for 8 years. And I go, well, that case is it's an unreported case. So I think these numbers are extremely low. And so we should all be really conscious of this and what we can potentially do about it. And there's going to be good news at the end of this. Okay. So there are subtypes. I'm not going to, bore you with too much detail, but there are a number of different types of dementia. Alzheimer's being the most common one. I find in my reviews of a lot of different patients is that a lot of times Alzheimer's has mixed factors. A huge number of the patients that I see with Alzheimer's or diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia also have coronary heart disease. They have carotid disease, they have type 2 diabetes, they have all the metabolic diseases of the vascular system, and the brain is, after all, a vascular organ. Won't talk too much about Lewy body dementia. You're probably familiar with that after Robin Williams was diagnosed with it. Frontotemporal dementia is a more rare thing, but just be aware that Alzheimer's is not the only player in town. So this is just a little bit of education on what the different subtypes look like. Lewy body has a lot of hallucinations with it. That's one of the things that categorizes it, and it can look, especially when it comes on at the same time as Parkinson's, that can be confused with Parkinson's sometimes. Vascular dementia is, I think, underdiagnosed because we have, of course, an epidemic of vascular disease in our country. And many of the patients, as I said, who I've seen who have diagnosed with dementia also have significant vascular disease. So I do think it's underrepresented. Next, Caitlin. So dementia once dementia is advanced to the moderate stage where a person is no longer able to fully take care of themselves, there is no reversibility. The drugs basically just slow things down, and at best, they slow things down. I will tell you to stay tuned. One of the videos that we're going to show, time permitting, is Dr. Dean Ornish, who is kind of one of the heroes of mine, who proved almost 30 years ago that coronary artery disease is reversible, which was a massively brain-blowing concept to me at the time. And he's provided us with a study that is not published yet, but in hearing him talk behind the scenes, he feels very encouraging that his program of lifestyle has the potential to reverse even farther along, but we'll wait and see that until it's published in the scientific literature. Mild cognitive impairment, I'm going to touch on today. I think you need to understand what this is. If you understand diabetes and pre-diabetes, the same concept, with mild cognitive impairment is sort of the precursor, and it's usually a long 10 to 20 year period, maybe even longer in some patients, before a formal diagnosis of dementia is made. No one knows if mild cognitive impairment automatically means that you're certainly at higher risk of dementia, but it is not by any means ironclad that you're going to get dementia. But it's the precursor stage, and I think those are the patients that we really need to be focused on, because it's been shown, especially through the work of the neurologist that I'm referring to today, that it is reversible, significantly reversible. Okay. So just a little bit of a snapshot of how to delineate between healthy aging, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia. Don't panic if you see this chart and you see forgetting to go to the port, losing things often. I've lost things often since I was 14 years old, and I don't have mild cognitive impairment. So it's a continuum here, okay? It's not meant to say ironclad, but as you can see, things progress to where a diagnosis of dementia basically means you're having trouble having a conversation, reading or writing, you're asking the same question, and you're telling the same story over and over again. Again, I can tell the same story over and over again sometimes, but it's more about a pattern of where this is occurring on a daily basis. Obviously, when you quit being able to balance your checkbook or you start losing what we call instrumental activities of daily living, once you start losing that, you usually have a formal diagnosis of dementia made. And obviously, once delusions, paranoia, hallucinations, and more of a loss of self comes in with further advancing stages of dementia. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. These are the drugs that have been first approved by the FDA in 1996, donazepam, Aricept. You can see all the side effects. Again, these came out with a lot of high hopes. And again, if you know a relative or you know someone on these and it seems to be helping, please don't stop it. I'm just telling you my personal experience, and some of my personal experience is a little warped because I've taken care of the more advanced cases of dementia through the years, and I've seen fewer and fewer cases of the milder forms. And it's probably, these drugs do have some indication in those patients. So basically, this is a categorization. There's a number of different, there's a number of different ways of categorizing dementia, but this just sort of gives you a snapshot, and this will be on the tape, so you don't have to necessarily feel like you have to take pictures or anything. But basically, a lot of what I saw through the years, particularly in patients that had to be institutionalized, were in these bottom categories where basic activities of daily living, toileting, the like, and everything such as that. Difficulty swallowing certainly comes toward the end. Of course, the first categories, basically the not demented and the mild demented, is where I think we really need to focus our attention, because that is where, as in most things, the earlier you catch something and the more intervention, the more lifestyle you put on these things, the more effective it's going to be. You may have heard the new Alzheimer's drugs, and I can't give a lecture on Alzheimer's without touching on these. There's been two new biologic agents approved by the FDA controversially in the last 2 years. They are biologic agents, meaning that they attach to the amyloid plaques in the brain and they trick the immune system, or not trick it, but they activate the immune system to clear the amyloid out. It sounds great. I'm skeptical. The people that I trust, who I look to for information, are a bit skeptical. Part of this, I think, is just because there has been so little movement on Alzheimer's pharmacotherapy in the last decade or two that we're kind of desperate to approve anything. This has been shown to be somewhat effective. As the next slide, I'll just give you the next one. So if you ever see these, you'll recognize the name. So basically, it can slow early dementia by 5 to 7 months. It slows it. There's no evidence at this point, at least that I'm aware of, that it does significant reversibility on the disease. One of them, I forget which one of them is $26,000 a year. The other one is $56,000 a year. It's an intravenous injection. There's about a 10% risk of bleeding in the brain, because as you're messing with the biology of these plaques and they're a bit unstable, that you can get bleeds in the brain. So there are substantial side effects to these. Next slide. Works great on mice. If you're a mouse with a lot of disposable income and you're a laboratory mouse and you've got good health insurance and you've got a lot of money to spare, I'd say these drugs would probably be really good, and I would highly recommend them. Otherwise, I'm not so sure. I can't ever get by with one of these without giving a far side. I'll read this for you. This is a dinosaur convention. And the picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have the brain the size of a walnut. These drugs might actually be pretty effective in dinosaurs because the smaller the brain and the simpler the brain, these drugs are very effective. The human brain is incredibly complex, and we'll get into that just a little bit. Next slide. So now we're going to start getting into the good stuff, the preventative, the lifestyle piece of the evidence that is available to us now on the reversibility of cognitive decline. And this slide is fairly old, and if you look at, this is from University of Southern California. This is an older slide. I think this comes from maybe a dozen years ago. And you'll see nothing on the increase and decrease of how you reverse or prevent dementia that have anything to do with diet other than obesity being a risk factor. All of these have to do with depression, diabetes, alcohol, air pollution, head injury, and these are all valid things. Hearing loss, certainly these are all valid things, but it's been known for quite a while, even absent dietary changes and the like, that there is hope and that the cards aren't necessarily stacked genetically. Okay. So these are the two diets that have been widely publicized in the literature in the last decade on how diet can revert or can prevent cognitive decline and maybe even reverse it. And they're both, they both have validity. They're both softer versions of whole food plant-based, but of course the Mediterranean diet, as you can see, has a pyramid, and most of the pyramid here is all these colorful vegetables and grains and the things that we love about the Mediterranean diet. As you go up the pyramid, fish and seafood is included on there. Poultry, eggs, cheese, yogurt are also mentioned on there, as well as meats and sweets at the very top. The Mediterranean diet appeals to a lot of people because it doesn't shake people's cages as much, and I think doctors feel like, well, people can do that maybe, so let's not tell the whole story, but there's a better story here. The DASH diet is another iteration of the dietary interventions to stop hypertension. And all of the interventions there are basically very conservative. 6 to 8 servings, 4 to 5 servings of vegetables per day, 4 to 5 servings of fruit. It's a really good diet, and it has worked wonders in hypertension. And the evidence on this diet on dementia and cognitive decline is also very good. Next slide. What's the MIND diet? The Mediterranean intervention for neurodegenerative degeneration. So this is the first diet that actually kind of really focused in on cognitive decline, and so if you'll notice, at least 3 servings of whole grains each day, berries twice a week. Pretty easy for most people. The MIND diet is very easy to follow because it doesn't require a lot of patience, to be honest. And it allows cheese, fried food, and fast food no more than once a week, no more than 1 tablespoon a day of butter or margarine, pastries and sweets less than 5 times a week. This is one of those diets that, I think we can get a lot more people doing this, and it's been somewhat successful, and it does work. Somewhat. Next slide, Caleb. So let's talk about the doctors at Loma Linda whose book is over there and who I've been studying and taking a master class from. And these are brilliant neurologists trained at the finest universities, a husband-wife team. They work in Loma Linda, California. And when they became neurologists and they moved to Loma Linda years ago, they were pretty much the referral doctors for a number of patients in an academic setting. So they were able to do detailed studies on 3,000 patients when they first got there. They did an incredible job of documenting who all these patients were, what their dietary habits were, what their lifestyle were. And what they found out of the first 3,000 patients they saw with dementia is they found 19 were pure plant eaters. Now, if you understand the Adventists in Loma Linda, California, about 15% of the Adventists are pure plant eaters. So if you went by the actual math of this, you would have expected about 450 of those 3,000 patients would be pure plant eaters. Well, they found 19. And this was the first sort of eye-opener that they had of, wait a minute, when we take lifestyle and really put it to the full 100%, let's maximize it out as much as we can. The expected number of cases in their sample of 3,000 patients dropped from 450 to 19. Do the math. So I want to take a quick slide and talk about choline, because some of you may have heard that, and you may have heard we saw a public service announcement on PBS a few weeks ago with a dietitian talking about kids needing eggs and seafood because of the choline content to develop their brains, and I'm just sitting there going, let's talk about this a little bit. So you need to know what choline is. Choline is it's a neurotransmitter. We make some in our liver, but we do need dietary sources of it, and it is very important in producing brain health. So it's an important neurotransmitter, and we do need it in the diet. And the heaviest sources in the meat family are liver. Liver is probably the most, you eat liver, it's made in the liver, it kind of makes sense. Liver, meat, and eggs are very strong dietary sources, and it is actually one of the reasons the Mind diet included chicken is because they were fearful people wouldn't get enough choline. Well, it just so happens that there are plentiful sources in the plant kingdom, including the biggest one is soy. Soybeans have a massive amount of choline. So soy milk, soy nuts, other sources, broccoli is a good source. Tofu, cruciferous vegetables, of course, broccoli, cauliflower, quinoa, you can see the list here, I won't mention everything, but mushrooms, all kinds of beans are excellent sources of choline. So it's kind of one of those things that the meat and egg industry has latched onto this, and they have said that choline should be a dietary requirement because we have a lot of it in our products. The problem is, of course, that if you ignore dietary inflammatory index, if you ignore oxidative stress, cholesterol and saturated fat, which impair blood flow to the brain, of course your product is also doing that, So it's emphasizing the one or two things that are good with your product and ignoring the 4 or 5 things that may be causing cognitive decline. So I'm not a fan of animal sources of choline. There's plenty of other ways to get it. I get this question. I think I've had this question at least 3 or 4 times at these lunch and learns. Can I eat fish? Is fish okay? And is it a good guy? Is it a bad guy? My answer is, yeah, it is, both. And you need to kind of dive down into this a little more to kind of go, okay, well, look, there are plenty of sources, and you can read a lot of different sources online, and it will tell you that fish once or twice a week is associated with lower incidence of cognitive decline, and that is partially true. The reason that fish is included on this is because it's strong omega-3 fatty acid content. And of course, there's plenty of other plant sources of omega-3s, and the question comes, well, now, why do fish have omega-3s? And it's, well, because they eat algae. That's the source of it. The fish is the middleman. So when you're eating fish for omega-3s, you're basically eating the middleman or middlewoman, as the case may be. So I think it's important to remember that it's a mixed bag, and I'm a little concerned. I mean, there are certain kinds of fish that I would avoid just because of the toxicity of our waters have gotten a little shaky, and so if you're going to eat fish, I would choose wild-caught salmon, sardines, and herring are your best choices. The younger the fish, the less time it's been in the water all this time, the less chance of toxicity of what's in the polluted waters will come into play. So this is a dietary inflammatory index, and as you recall on our last Lunch and Learn about inflammation is sort of like the next horizon of medicine. Every specialty in medicine, from pulmonary to renal to cardiac to neurology, everybody understands that inflammation is ground zero of just about every illness that we suffer from. Dementia is no exception. So what we eat and how inflammatory our food is extremely important. If we can stop it at ground zero and produce less inflammation in our bodies, will be less likely to develop chronic inflammatory diseases. And believe it or not, dementia is one of those diseases. I put this up just as a general guide to you. Turmeric fiber, which is basically fruits and vegetables in their whole form. Isoflavones, beta-carotene, these are all phytonutrients from plants. Green tea, garlic, omega-3s. You'll be interested to know coffee is right up there with a brain food. And so in my readings on coffee content, and I'll be asked this, I know a lot, but coffee is a brain food. And it has been clearly associated with improved cognition, even up to 5 cups of coffee a day. If you can't tolerate coffee, I'm not advocating you start going out and drinking it, but if you're drinking coffee, particularly if you're not adding a lot of junk to it, it is a brain food. Alcohol is listed as anti-inflammatory. Word of caution: dosage, 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 and type of alcohol. So a 4-ounce glass of red wine a couple of times a week, probably on balance good. Once you start getting above that, it becomes problematic. So I just warn everybody, alcohol is extremely dose related. If you're not drinking, do not start. If you are drinking, limit it as much as you can. If you can't limit it, that's probably a good sign to quit. But alcohol on balance is not something that I recommend, certainly for dementia. Certainly for patients that start having cognitive issues, it can be problematic. But remember, dosage, low dosage, 2 to 3 times a week is not going to be harmful. Caitlin? So I'm going to talk about a few studies here and just kind of give you the data that's out there. And this is a study that was done on all-cause dementia, correlating it with dietary inflammatory index. So the previous slide, the patients that were eating more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, had the lowest dietary index. And so this was a United Kingdom biobank study where they studied over 166,000 patients. For each additional unit score, meaning for as the diet became more and more anti-inflammatory, there was a 39.1% increase in dementia, the higher the dietary inflammatory index got. So let me make sure I say that correctly. The more inflammation in the diet, each point was worth 39.1% increase in dementia. And similar correlations have been seen in the Framingham study. For those of you not aware, the people in Framingham, Massachusetts have been part of a huge longitudinal study for the last 50, 60 years. And the same type of information is coming out from Framingham as well. Bottom line, there's a significant correlation between a Western pro-inflammatory diet that is heavy on meat, dairy, and processed sugar and ultra-processed food in all-cause dementia. Now, one word of quick caution on this, on people who are vegans, it tells me what you don't eat. There are plenty of things in the vegan world that you can eat that are pro-inflammatory. French fries and Oreo cookies come to mind. So this is my favorite slide of the day because it just kind of gives you a good anti-inflammatory brain food. Everything on here is excellent for the brain, either because of its phytonutrients, either because of its fiber, or its omega-3 content, as you see with the chia seeds, and one of my favorites, of course, is chia seeds. But all of these things, try to eat as much variety of these things as often as you can, as your body tolerates. These are all healing medications. So I'm going to finish up here with a little bit of explanation on what this book is telling me, and hopefully will be telling you as well. They got a really cool mnemonic, which I think is really, really useful in sort of crystallizing what lifestyle means to people with cognitive decline. So neuro, N-E-U-R-O, nutrition. And they're strong advocates of whole food, plant-based, as much as possible. We're not trying to be militaristic about this, but we just want to give you full disclosure of what works best. And if you can do it 90% marvelous. Do it the best you can. But nutrition means whole food, plant-based. Nuts, grains, seeds, legumes, fruits, vegetables, variety of color, Mediterranean colors, so everything under the sun with different colors to it. That's the nutrition piece. The exercise piece, and we'll break this down just a little bit, but this is moderate exercise, and exercise is hugely important in preventing and reversing cognitive decline. And they go into some specifics in the book about what exercise actually means. There are specific things you can do, like a brisk walk is perfect. 30 minutes 5 times a week is excellent. Leg exercises, believe it or not, like leg press. If you go to the gym and you see the leg press and the using your legs to train your body and do some weight training for your legs is actually one of the most directly correlating things with improving cognition, because the large muscles are requiring blood, more blood to the brain, better connections that are made. Unwind. What does unwind mean? And we'll get into that just a little bit, but basically, mindfulness, prayer, meditation, breathing, time for fun, whatever that looks like for you. Restore is sleep, mostly. 7 hours is the magic number for just about everybody, and no, just because you get older doesn't mean you need less sleep. You still need 7 to 8 hours of restorative sleep. And I would think of sleep as like the garbage disposal time for our brain. All the toxins and all the metabolites that build up in our brain during an active day need time to be metabolized during sleep. And so sleep is kind of like the garbage disposal time for our brains. And optimized, we'll get into that a little bit of what that means, but that's learning a new language, things of that nature to train our brains and to keep our brains moving, use it or lose it. So we're going to bust a few myths here. Hopefully we're going to bust them for you. Genetics is the primary cause of dementia. No. There's genetic tendency for sure. There are genes that are identified that put you at higher risk, no question. The way I look at it is, yes, in some people, genes can load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And if you don't pull the trigger, the gun was never fired. So essentially, old age is associated with cognitive decline? No way. That's a myth. That's been propagated by my profession in some ways. Oh, you're just getting old. Horse hockey. Brain cells and connections decline with age? No. Myth. Each brain cell is capable of 30,000 connections, and we don't use all of those. And ways that we can improve that are all of these 5 things, all of the mnemonic, cause our brains to work better, and they all interplay with each other. And I'll explain that in just a minute, but I wanted to bust a few myths first. Motivation declines with age. The myth is that these connections can increase in age. That's actually not a myth. Our brain connections are able to make connections with each other. There's over 100 trillion connections between neurons in our brain. It's incredibly redundant, and we need to use that redundancy to our advantage. Okay? So this is just a little further detail on what I was just talking about. We won't spend too much time on this slide, but basically nutrition has a profound effect on cognition. Like I said, the mind diet, which is a softer, gentler version of whole food, plant-based, and allows, some of the bad actors to happen a few times a week, still is associated with a 53% reduction in dementia. That's incredible. And you're only talking about berries twice a week. I don't know about you guys, but I eat berries every single day. Coffee, tea, greens, all very good resources for improving our cognition. I believe, and the authors certainly believe, that we're scratching the surface of how we can use nutrition to reverse cognitive decline. Exercise, I say 25, 30 minutes of brisk walking every day can reduce your risk by 40%. You start adding 40% here, 50% here, 40% there. You start seeing Each one of these has an independent reduction. When you add them all together, it's why the authors believe that 90% of cognitive decline is reversible. And I have no reason to disagree with them. Unwind. Just a minute on what unwind means. Stress reduction, having purpose in life. They use a term called turning bad stress into good stress, and that may confuse you a little bit. We are inundated with bad news on a daily basis. It's become almost a national pastime to see what horrific mass shooting has occurred, what homeless situation is happening, what migration system is failing. There's bad news on television every day. And the way I look at it is, no, I'm not saying put blinders on and live in a bubble. I am saying pay attention for 5 or 10 minutes. That's probably all the news that's available for the day. Everything else is probably a lot of noise and opinion. And the way you turn bad stress, or let's call it bad stress. Bad stress is outside in. Good stress is inside out. So you see a healthcare crisis and you're frustrated because 8 to 10% of people in the wealthiest country in the world don't have health insurance. Go volunteer at the Hope Center. That's how you turn outside in stress to inside out stress. Homelessness. It frustrates you. All these people who are living on the streets. Go to a homeless shelter. Donate your money, your time, your talent. Touch people. That turns bad stress into good stress, and it changes the body's chemistry. Because when you start being of service and you start helping people and you quit feeding into the negativity that's constantly being fed you on a daily basis, you turn bad stress into good stress, and guess what? Your mind likes that. It creates better neuronal connections in your brain, and it is actually healthy for you. Quality sleep we talked about. Think of sleep as sleep is not. We've kind of badmouthed sleep in this country for so long because we've sort of idolized the type A, hard driving, successful person, and this person only needs 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Unlikely. There are some people who need less than others, but the vast majority of us need 7 to 8 hours of quality restorative sleep every night. There's no substitute for that. Optimize your brain. Just give you one example. I've thought about what can I do to optimize my brain a little bit, and I see Hispanic patients all the time at the clinic, and there's usually a translator there. I took high school Spanish. Rhonda and I made a commitment to each other to go on Babbel and learn Spanish in the next couple of months. That's an example of how you optimize your brain. It could be music. You typically want things that are occupying different parts of the brain. And music and language and things like that require multiple inputs from different parts of the brain. I think that's better than doing puzzles and reading, which is helpful, but it's only one repetitive part of the brain. I think when we can engage different parts of the brain, we do a lot better. Caitlin? The brain loves challenge. The brain loves to be challenged with new things, but the brain also loves routine. So the brain loves consistent bedtime. The brain loves morning brisk walks. The brain loves healthy routines and new challenges. The brain loves that too. These are things that cause increased neuronal connections in the brain, and I'm convinced is one of the authors are also convinced that this is one way to strengthen these neuronal connections in our brain and not only stop mild cognitive impairment from progressing to dementia, but reversing it. And they've shown time after time in their patients who do neurocognitive studies 6 months after going on their full neuro program, and they're performing better than they did no matter what age they are. Use it or lose it. The brain does not like extended time on the cell phone, extended time on the computer. All of those things are great tools, but they can be very brain foggy endeavors. So I would just encourage you, especially at night, to shut everything down as best you can after dinner time at night. That'd be a good lesson to do, Caitlin. I love this study. This was done in 2006, and it kind of goes to point out the use it or lose it phenomenon. This is a 2006 study on a pretty good number of British taxi and cab drivers. So if you think about it, and this was before Google Maps, by the way, so now everybody doesn't have to think, which may be a bad thing for the brain, but let's just go with this 2006 study. And what they found is that bus drivers who were in the same street every time, had a same pattern, never had to alter it, never had to wonder where they were going, were studied. And then their taxi driver counterparts were studied as well. And the taxi drivers didn't have Google Maps, and they had 26,000 streets. I didn't know there were 26,000 streets in London. And so with every pickup of a passenger they had to negotiate, okay, I've got 4 or 5 different ways to get from A to B. This is the time of day. Their brains were engaged actively. And what they showed on MRIs and nuclear scanning was that the hippocampus region of the brain, which is where our memories are most focused, were larger in the taxi drivers. So this is kind of direct evidence to me that use it or lose it, the brain's like a muscle. You work it, and you continually challenge it, just like you do on an arm curl, it's going to get stronger. Find purpose in life. This is so important in our walk to try to improve our thinking. Find your purpose in life. This is just huge. This is part of optimizing that neuro, that final O. Less TV, computer, cell phone, more community service. Find purpose. I'm ready to. And one final word on faith, and certainly communities of faith, especially where that faith is positive, especially when that faith lifts people up rather than tears people down, especially when that ministry is an open hand, not a fist. It is incredibly beneficial to the brain to be part of a community like that. It creates biological changes in us that is extremely positive, and I don't think we can gloss over that. There is complete scientific proof behind that. So don't forget the 6 senses, and no, that doesn't mean that your 6th sense is seeing dead people. If you remember the movie from 30 years ago. No, take care of all your senses. So in other words, regular eye exams, hearing if you need help. It's important to remember that our senses are the way we perceive the world, and as those diminish some, we need to attend to those and not ignore those. I can tell you how many patients I had through the years where we got their vision improved, we got their hearing improved, and all of a sudden their cognition started improving. Smell. I didn't really always catch this until COVID came along, and I was left without taste or smell after I caught COVID for about 6 months. And the way that I regained that back was smell therapy. If you're familiar with this, I had about 4 or 5 different oils every night that I would smell, and it works. I will gradually regain this back. So the question is diminished smelling causative of dementia or dementia? Nobody really knows what the chicken and the egg is here. What we do know is that engaging your senses of smell is important in retaining cognitive function, that they go together. And there's a recent study that was just published this year in the Journal of Neurology that took a group of patients where they used essential oils when they slept at night. And in the other group, they used a dummy that didn't really have much in the way of aroma to it. And they compared their neurocognitive studies 6 months later, and there was a massive improvement in the group that had the essential oils smelling. So it's a burgeoning area of research that's very interesting. Taste. And so this is another way where nutrition and taste and challenging your taste buds and getting away from breadcrumbs and butter and eggs and cheese and all those things with fried foods, all those lovely things we all grew up on and loved. Smelling different herbs and seasonings and spices. Part of taste is that sense of smell. The more we engage that, I think the better our cognition becomes. Touch. As we learned in the pandemic, there's no substitute for human touch. And human touch is healing. And it's my opinion that it's also improves your cognition when you touch other people, when you hug people, when you shake people's hands, when you come from a place of love. Biological changes occur in your brain that are good for you. And the opposite is true for the opposite. Intuition, and this is the sixth sense. And I'll tell you, as I have done this program personally over the last 10 to 15 years, where our diet has gotten a lot cleaner, we exercise, we try to do all these things. I took up yoga at the age of 56. I really try to engage all of these things because I really want to keep my marbles as long as I can and be able to hopefully help people as long as God wants me on this earth. And I found that my sense of kind of getting a sixth sense of knowing this is right for me, this is wrong for me, has really gotten a lot better. And I think part of that is just because I'm feeding my body. All of these neuro things, the nutrition, the exercise, the unwind, the sleep, the optimize, they all have a positive feedback loop with each other. It's like there's multiple ways. You are eating better. You start exercising more. You sleep better. You sleep better. You're in a better mood. You're in a more better position to serve. It's a whole feedback loop that all five of these things have with each other. And it's just an incredible thing when you start using the positive feedback loop of all these five things. And so I think that my sense of intuition, even women have better intuition than guys do as a general rule, and my wife has 100 times better intuition than I do. I'm caught maybe 50 times greater now that I've done this. Caitlin. There's reason for hope. Dementia is not an inevitable consequence. It is not necessarily in your genes. Look to the blue zones. For many of you that are aware, and there's not a lecture that goes by that I don't fail to mention the blue zones. The blue zones are areas of the world that are doing just about all of these, in fact, all of these neuro things I'm talking about well, lower incidence of dementia, lower incidence of cognitive decline. People have purpose. Look to the wisdom of the blue zones to teach you. And look close to home. There's a brochure down here about Hope Community, and one of the goals of Hope Community is to turn Fairhope into a blue zone. And I have a huge connection with this movement. There's more information down here. You can go online and find out what it is. So if you're looking for something locally, act locally, think globally. This is a wonderful opportunity to optimize, if you will, the O in neuro. Caitlin. Dean Ornish, one of my heroes. I remember seeing him on the cover of Time and Newsweek in the 1990s. I've been in practice probably 10 years. And he came out with his landmark study that showed that coronary artery disease is reversible. And my mind was blown. That's not possible. But he showed that it was, and everybody thought that this was going to save cardiology. It didn't happen. Unfortunately, there are no strong commercial pharmacological food industry advocates that want Dr. Ornish's plan to succeed, and so he's well known and he's done very well, and he's got clinics around the world. But his message didn't penetrate, unfortunately, and even to a lot of my colleagues. But Dr. Ornish, 4 or 5 years ago, began a landmark study, to look to see whether his program to reverse heart disease would also work on dementia. It is currently under review, under several peer-reviewed articles. It may we don't know what it's going to show. The Nutrition and Medicine Conference that Lindsay and I went to in Washington, D.C. in August, he was a featured speaker. I could tell by the look in his face he knew the results, and he knew that there was going to be some good stuff come out, but he couldn't talk about it. So don't talk about it. It's not published yet. I don't know what it's going to show. But Dr. Ornish, there's an interview here. We're good on time. I'm not worried about it. We got a video. The first video is just an interview with Dr. Ornish about the study. I just wanted you to be aware, to be looking for this in the near future. Hopefully we'll start seeing some results from this study.
Welcome to the UC San Diego Shiley Marcos Alzheimer's Disease Research Center Brain Blast Series. My name is James Brewer, and I'm the director of the UC San Diego Department of Neurosciences and the Shiley Marcos Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I'm a professor of neurology, a clinical neurologist, and a brain imaging researcher. I'm pleased to present to you our virtual Brain Blast series. Each of the talks included in the series have been created by Shiley Marcos ADRC colleagues with expertise in brain aging research that focuses on prevention, detection, diagnosis, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Each of the experts featured in the series studies a unique aspect of brain aging and has developed a brief overview of their current research to highlight the state-of-the-art work that's going on here at UCSD and our center. We hope you'll take advantage of this free resource to learn more about the advances in brain aging, the importance of research, and the multitude of opportunities to get involved and participate in research studies.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dean Ornish. I'm a clinical professor of medicine at UC San Diego as well as at UCSF. And I'm here to talk about an exciting new study that we're in the middle of doing to see whether comprehensive lifestyle changes may stop or maybe even reverse the progression of men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. I have a particular interest in this because my mom died of Alzheimer's and all of her siblings, and I have one of the genes for it. Now, it's easy to get discouraged because there are no drugs that can even stop the disease from getting worse, but we think that perhaps we might be able to stop and maybe even reverse it. And the reason is that I began doing research over 40 years ago. We found that a program of simple lifestyle changes, basically a whole foods plant-based diet that's low in fat and sugar, mostly fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and soy products, along with moderate exercise, walking a half an hour a day, plus some stress management techniques, including meditation, and love and support, with spending more time with friends and families in our support groups, sort of reduce it to its essence to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. That these same lifestyle changes 40 years ago we found could actually reverse the progression of even severe coronary heart disease. We were actually the first to prove that. At that time, it was thought that once you had heart disease, it could only get worse. Maybe you could slow down the rate at which you got worse, get worse more slowly, but that was about as good as you could do. We found that more intensive lifestyle changes could actually reverse it. We found that within just a month, the blood flow to the heart improved, and there was a 90% reduction in angina or chest pain. After a year, even severely clogged arteries became measurably less clogged compared to the control group that got worse during that time. And after 5 years, we found there was even more reversal than after 1 year. And we published our findings in the leading peer-reviewed medical journals, like the Journal of the American Medical Association, The Lancet, and others. And I think it's a good example of ounce of prevention and pound of cure. It's hard to reverse a life-threatening disease. We found these same lifestyle changes over time could reverse type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity. We found when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, turns on the good genes that keep us healthy, turns off the ones that cause us to get sick, particularly the genes that promote chronic inflammation and oxidative stress and other mechanisms that underlie so many of these different conditions. We did the first randomized trial showing these same lifestyle changes could stop or even reverse the progression of men who have early stage prostate cancer in collaboration with the chairs of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York and at University of California, San Francisco. We did a study with Dr. Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, that when you change your lifestyle, over 500 genes are changed. And in fact, as I mentioned, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad ones. In just 3 months, I was told, like so many people, that, oh, I've just got bad genes, what can you do? Well, it turns out you can do a lot. Again, not to blame, but to empower. We did a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who's got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate aging. And we found that we could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this in The Lancet, the editors called it first study showing that lifestyle changes may reverse aging on a cellular level. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 40 years ago. The same, what's good for your heart is good for your brain and vice versa. It takes a lot to reverse a chronic disease. Think of like ounce of prevention, pound of cure. This is more the pound of cure. But if you're willing to make big enough changes, we hope that there might be some improvement. We don't know yet. That's the whole point of doing this study. And these same mechanisms that affect heart disease and diabetes and prostate cancer and so on also affect Alzheimer's as well. And so we've designed a study where we're recruiting a total of 100 men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease with mild cognitive impairment. And we're randomly dividing them into two groups for the first 20 weeks. Half were asked to make this intensive lifestyle change, which I should mention also, Medicare created a new benefit category to cover this program for reversing heart disease. It was the first time that Medicare did anything like that. And just a couple of months ago, they agreed to cover the same program when offered virtually via Zoom as when it's done in hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices. And so for the last 2 years, we've been working with the first group of patients in our Alzheimer's study, randomly dividing them into two groups. One group gets the lifestyle intervention for 20 weeks, and the other group we say, just do what you've been doing. We test both groups at the beginning and after 20 weeks, and we compare them. And then the first group, who was in the control group, now they get the program for a total of 40 weeks. The first group gets it for 20 more weeks for a total of 40 weeks, and then we test them again, and we compare them. That way everybody gets the program. One group just has to wait 20 weeks to do that. Now, we're looking for people who are age 45 to 90, who have, again, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, or mild dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And we're doing this in collaboration with Dr. Douglas Galasco, who's one of the senior neurologists at UC San Diego, and also the senior neurologist at Harvard Medical School and the Mass General Hospital, and also a renowned health center in Nevada, as well as in University of California, San Francisco. Again, it's all done via Zoom. We were meeting with people in person, but when COVID hit 2 years ago, we decided we would do it all via Zoom. So you can now do this from the privacy of your own home. We provide you and your spouse or caregiver 21 meals a week to make it really easy to stay on the program. You need to live with a spouse or a caregiver in order to be eligible. We found that it's just hard to do it by yourself. There's no cost to you for any of these things. And we ask you to meet 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time, where we kind of go through the lifestyle changes with you to make it easier. The 3 primary tests that we're using are the same tests that are used in FDA drug trials. The ADS-COG, the clinical dementia rating, and the clinical global impression of change scores. As well as we're looking at some of the biomarkers, again, changes in telomeres and gene expression and the microbiome, and things like that, to get a better idea of what some of these mechanisms are. Now, I can't really talk too much about the interim findings, but we're very encouraging. Many of the patients, but not all of them, are beginning to show some improvement. And that's particularly exciting because, as you probably know, there are no drugs that can even stop the disease from getting worse. Again, 44 years ago, it was the same with heart disease. It was thought that the best you could do would be to slow it down, which is what a lot of people think about Alzheimer's. But we already know that moderate changes do slow the progression of dementia. Our theory is that more intensive ones might stop or reverse it. And so, again, we're encouraged by our interim findings. Unlike most interventions, the only side effects here are good ones. And I hope that if you're interested in learning more about our program, I hope that you'll give us a call. You can reach us you can reach me on my email at dean.ornish@pmri.org, or you can just give us a call, 415-332-2525, extension 255. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation.
One more and then we'll be done. There's just a very short video, I think it's about 3 minutes long, from Dr. Neil Barnard, who is the chairman of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, who is going to be sponsoring our rally on this coming Saturday, the organization that over 17,000 physicians, including myself, are strong members of. And he's such a clear communicator. This is a brief interview he did about dementia.
You may be able to lower your risk of Alzheimer's disease by making certain choices at mealtime. That advice comes from a new book Power Foods for the Brain, an effective 3-step plan to protect your mind and strengthen your memory. Author is Dr. Neil Barnard. He is a nutritionist researcher at George Washington University. We're pleased to have him here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's start off with what we should avoid.
Well, you know, there's nothing more frightening than losing your memory and losing your connections. And most people have thought, well, it's just part of aging. I'm going to spend the last 5 or 10 years of my life not knowing anybody. The beautiful news is we now know what seems to be triggering that so that we can avoid it. 3 things. The first is, if you look inside the brain of a person who's getting Alzheimer's disease, there are little collections of proteins. It's called beta amyloid. And if you look at what contributes to that, saturated fat, that's the fats in meats and in dairy products. Number 2, the trans fats, donuts, pastries. And the third, if you look inside those little amyloid plaques, they have traces of metals, iron and copper and aluminum, and that can come from cookware, even everyday products. So those things, the trans fats, the saturated fats, and the metals seem to be contributing to that process, and we can avoid those things.
I had to have a moment when you said that in your book, because you said healthy diets exclude meat and dairy products, all of which I've eaten within the last 24 hours. So you're saying what we should be concentrating and eating are plants.
Well, the 4 food groups that everybody should be focusing on: vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. When people look at vegetarians, they live longer, they have less heart disease, and it looks like they have an edge in mental health as well, less risk of dementia. So for everybody who's making that big bowl of oatmeal this morning and putting on the blueberries and cinnamon and raisins, extra points for them.
And beyond food, there's exercise and...
An amazing thing, researchers have shown that even 30 to 40 minutes of exercise, brisk walk, 3 times a week, actually changes the brain physically. The part of the brain called the hippocampus that's essential for memory pumps up a little bit. It measurably increases over time, and that counteracts the brain shrinkage that most people have.
And you also said we should pay attention to metals. I'd never thought about that. Aluminum, iron, copper. You said even in your deodorant, even in your cookware is something we should pay attention to.
If you have a cast iron pan, over time it will rust. That's oxidation. And that happens to the metals that get into your body. So you need a trace of iron for healthy blood cells, but iron builds up in the brain and it oxidizes. That releases free radicals. That destroys brain cells. So a stainless steel pan's better than a cast iron pan. If you got copper pipes, use bottled water for whatever you're drinking in the morning.
Can you please tell me something other than a blueberry and a walnut that is tasty to eat?
Well, there are so many choices.
Just give me one, doctor.
Okay,
Just give me one.
let's have pancakes this morning, and instead of putting butter all over the top, maybe some maple syrup, put some blueberries on top, that's fine.
Okay.
For lunch, if you're gonna have chili, not the meat chili, have the bean chili. For dinner, if you have spaghetti, top it with artichoke hearts, wild mushrooms, chunky tomatoes, all the spice, that's fine. A glass of wine won't kill you, and the espresso at the end is okay too.
But what about all those doctors that don't eat too much wheat products?
About 7% of the population is sensitive to wheat, and they do get sort of mentally fuzzy. The other 93%, no problem.
All right, Dr. Neil Barnard, thank you.
Sure.
Power Foods for the Brain, it's on sale now.
That's going to be it, folks. I can't think of a better person to end with Neil Barnard. When Lindsay and I went to, of course, we got to meet him, and one of the most surprising things about the conference, Lindsay and I looked at each other and went, "What?" She said, "Dr. Barnard just celebrated his 70th birthday." I said, "Okay, that's all I need to know about what he's doing here." So, Lindsay, let's cut the tape at this point, because I want to make sure people have privacy when they ask questions, and we won't publish any of this. And we got a little book giveaway to do here, so